Sup, I'm the Scholarlysaurus, and I love to sculpt. And in honor of its 120th anniversary, and to tickle my nostalgia bone, I made a T-Rex. Not just any T-Rex, no, no, no. I made a T-Rex from the most underrated game of all time, Dino Island. Now, as a wee little lad, I always enjoyed me a good old-fashioned simulator game like Zoo Tycoon, J-Pog, and even the titularly named Roller Coaster Tycoon. And I was always infatuated with park sims in general. And one that really caught my eye was a beautifully crafted story by the name of Dino Island, released by the deliciously named gaming company back in 2002 for PC and Mac, Monte Cristo. As a kid, I always wanted a piece of physical media from every game I ever enjoyed playing, whether it be games like Spore or the aforementioned J-Pog, which, if you guys don't know, is Jurassic Park Operation Genesis. I always wanted a toy or a cool action figure or a statue to represent my love for that specific game in mind. And that feeling still ranged true as a child for Dino Island itself. Cut to however many decades later, and I'm still hankering for one. And I felt it be quite a treat to test my hand at making a close to as accurate as possible Dino Island T-Rex, which is what we are doing right now. Also, I think it's going to be pretty taxing to keep saying Dino Island T-Rex, so we're going to call him Gus. Thank you to my friend Tristan for naming him. After making Gus's skeleton out of wire, I covered that with layers upon layers of aluminum foil to help increase the amount of surface area I could work with while limiting the amount of weight that this armature will be holding. I then cover it with layers upon layers of Sculpey polymer clay, smoothing out areas as I go. This particular sculpt took a long time and a lot of energy and patience and hard work, and I think it turned out pretty dang good in the very end. I went through 2 iterations of Gus before I landed on the third and final one, and let's just say that it was a bit of an uphill struggle. Spoiler warning, it's not this one. Regardless, the process is pretty much the same, albeit a couple details changed here and there, but I think you guys will enjoy it nonetheless. Like I said, it took a lot of hard work and a lot of patience and dedication, and I think it came out pretty dang good for what I had in mind. And with Gus's torso all baked and ready to go, I can begin encapsulating his legs in more clay. I decided I wanted to give Gus a bit of a realistic looking texture to his skin, so in doing that, I had smoothed out his leg with isopropyl alcohol and a stiff brush, and took one of my clay texture rollers. I just made a ball of clay, rolled it into a small dome, and then pinched and pulled at the end and poked holes in it with varying sizes of ball styluses, and then baked it in the oven. And that is what you see here. I just roll the stamp all over the uncured clay, and it gives me a pretty decent scale texture. Then it's just a case of using some small silicone shapers to help give me some added texture like the toes. Then adding more texture onto those said toes. Then it's just a case of brushing everything down with isopropyl alcohol to help diffuse all the harsh marks that the texture stamp might have made on the uncured clay. Then once everything was finished, I put it in the oven to bake, and then did the same thing to the other leg, baked that, and now we're on to sculpting the neck, covering that with a thicker layer of foil and adding subsequent amounts of clay onto that said neck. Gus has some pretty funky dimensions because if you didn't know, this is what a Dino Island T-Rex looks like. Very cartoony, very playful. Definitely would love to take your picnic basket. A favorite to children and hooligans abroad. I'm applying a thin layer of Bacon Bond, which is essentially a glue-like clay that will help the uncured clay stick to the cured clay. It's a nifty tool if you know what you're doing, and another spoiler warning, I also have no idea what I am doing. I will then cover that layer of foil with a thin layer of clay. I will also be doing it slightly off-center frame and out of focus, so you guys can see how much of a professional I truly am. And with the neck all baked and textured, we can get to, in my opinion, the hardest portion of any sculpt I ever do, making the head. As I stated previously, you boys got some pretty funky dimensions, so what I did was I just decided instead of an armature skeleton for the head like I normally do, I took some balls of aluminum foil and coated those in even more aluminum foil, and then make sure they were matching up to my reference, and then covering that weird pear-shaped ball of foil with progressively more layers of clay. It looks like Yoshi right now, but don't worry, we'll just keep refining the shape and constantly checking my references because I am anal about things. Making sure everything is off-center and out of frame so you guys get the best experience with me, Scholarlysaurus. Once Gus's melon is properly encased in clay, I can then go over it with quick brushing of isopropyl alcohol before adding in some more greeblies and, if I may say, wormy dealies of clay. I understand that the textures that are on the 3D rig that is in the game are basically just two-dimensional prints that have been rendered and placed onto a 3D model, but I kind of wanted to give it some more dimension, i.e. adding scales and, in this case, adding in eyebrow ridges and snout ridges. Just delicately going over them, smoothing everything out with my silicone shaper and adding in some sniffer holes for later. And once I poked a couple breathy holes into his snout, I decided to go over and work on his eye ridges. This was very intricate, I must say, for a game that's as cartoony as Dino Island. It was very, very interesting to see all this texture that, albeit is again two-dimensional, but still pretty well thought out. Unfortunately, this is the last time you will ever see Gus 2.0's thick ol' melon, because the sculpture itself kept falling over in the oven and his legs kept getting all bubbly due to air pockets from my negligence. But I decided to try my hand at it again, and if there's one thing I've learned about trying, is from Charles Darwin. If at first you don't succeed, try again. And he invented the tortoise, so that's gotta count for something. I went back to the drawing board and did everything all over again, and as you can clearly hear, pure grown man elation. I was in love. I didn't think Gus would have come out any better than I thought previously, but as you can see, Gus 3.0 had clearly meant that mark and then some. I also pre-baked some teeth and some claws off camera. Perfect. Your time will come, my dear Otis, don't you worry. Back to reality. Oh, there goes gravity. I have the pre-baked teeth that I will begin sanding so they look less like Doritos and more like Dorito teeth. I took some sanding sticks from my modeling kit carrier, and I will begin in the sanding process, using a higher grit sanding stick for the rougher edges, and then after that's done, moving on to a higher grit sanding stick to help smooth everything out. Then with some super glue and some tweezers, I can begin the toothing process. Just taking small dabs of glue onto the bottom of each tooth and putting it very gently onto the mouth itself. Again, doing it with my big old mittens in the way so you guys get the best experience. Aren't I great? I also did the same thing with the claws on the feet and the hands, and for the feet I decided to coat the base of each claw with some epoxy putty to help delineate where the toe met the claw itself. I then covered it with a white primer and decided to go over Gus with some progressively darker shades of olive and raw green. I had originally gone over him with just a darker and darker shade of olive green for the beginning, but as you'll see later in the video, I kinda decided to go over it all with a brighter olive green to help bring some brightness back and be more faithful, or somewhat more faithful, to the original art in the game. And as I said before, it is T-Rex's 120th anniversary of being discovered, and in keeping up with the inspiration trend to do this, I recently was inspired by YouTuber Edge Science for their video that they released recently, What Does T-Rex Mean to You? And I thought I'd throw my hat in the ring and tell you guys what T-Rex means to me. Majesty, power, grace, and ferocity. These four words I would gladly categorize T-Rex. It is not only my favorite dinosaur, it's my favorite animal of all time. I grew up with this animal, whether it be in documentaries like Walking with Dinosaurs or When Dinosaurs Roamed America, to TV shows like low-budget horror movies on the Sci-Fi Channel, or cartoon shows, toys, video games, everything that had to do with this animal, I was hooked. It can be both a villain, a hero, or strictly ambivalent. The pure personification of chaos incarnate. That's what we saw in Jurassic Park. That's what we saw in every other movie after Jurassic Park as well. Just the bones alone are enough to evoke this intimidation, this presence. Like I said, this ferocity. But the more we learn about this animal, the more we understand that it may have also been a very caring animal. Protection is also a great word to describe this beast. It is a majestic, incredible animal. And I am so happy that as a grown man now in my late 20s, that I can still safely say that I love dinosaurs. But I don't just love all dinosaurs, I love Tyrannosaurus Rex. Happy anniversary to the king of the tyrant reptiles. And that's all for that. Thank you, Edge Science, for educating not only me, but the masses of people that you encapsulate with your videos. And thank you for inspiring me to get all of this out and onto the table. Because everybody's asked me since day one, why did I love dinosaurs so much? Why do I still love dinosaurs so much? And that's why. That's why. So here's to you, T.rex. Happy anniversary. I also wanted to do this sculpt because I have never seen anybody try to tackle something like Dino Island. It unfortunately never got the audience that it deserved, and I would like to change that. Just how I'd like to show you how much I love sponge painting. Sponge painting is such a treat. What you do basically, you take a sponge, any size, it doesn't matter, dip it in some paint, and then go over your model with that paint. And just dab it all over. You can be as vigorous or as gentle as you want. And then to blend, you just take a dry portion of the sponge and dab the edges where you see fit until you see that smooth gradient. Isn't that lovely? I also did the same thing with the feet, adding progressively darker and darker shades of brown and raw umber to get that nice gradient. I then went with my finest tipped brush and went in with some dark brown and some raw umber again to create the stripes that go on to Gus's neck, back, and tail. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the footage of me painting on his neck because I just recently figured out that my camera had stopped recording when I recorded those portions. Isn't that lovely? I just found out recently that Gus also has some stripes on his head, so I just took that same color and made stripes on his head. I then went over Gus's claws with some yellow and some raw umber again and white to help give it that nice claw yellowish color. I also used the same color for the claws on his fingies. I then went back to Gus's teeth and covered each with a couple coats of white paint. I then went over each tooth with that same claw color watered down just a tad. That way when I wipe away a little bit from the tip of the tooth with a cotton swab, it gives me a nice gradient, slightly lighter at the tip and darker towards the root of the tooth. I then went back with an even more watered down raw umber just at the root of the tooth, again wiping away just a little bit with a cotton swab, leaving me with an even more perfect gradient. I did the same thing with the claws. I then went in with some dark green to create some minor yet appreciated 2D textures. I legitimately wanted a Roger Rabbit effect to happen, literally translating to the game had spit Gus out and is on my table, all 2D textures mounted on a 3D rig, and I think it came out pretty dang close. To that end, I will coat the inside of the mouth with the inside of the mouth colors, which is just red with a little bit of white and a little bit of orange to give it that warmth. I also painted him a tongue, but my camera had died when I was recording that, so just pretend like you saw me painting a tongue, and then we can all get on with our lives, because I'll be honest, this took me, like I said, a long time to do, but it all worked out in the end. And now that Gus is finally finished, we can get to work on his base. I just took a piece of MDF board, cut it to size, and then put equal sized pieces of foam board underneath to help bolster it with the weight, because this is going to be a hefty boy. I then went over it with some thin Mod Podge and some yellow paint to help lock everything and protect the MDF board. I then went with some sand colored paints, and then as you can see, I used some sponges to help give some texture with progressively darker shades, so it gives it that nice little sandy feeling. I then went over some select sections with some darker and lighter greens, because in the game, when you make an enclosure for your animals, they're going to have mostly sand, but there are some patches of shrubbery and grass around, and I wanted to emulate that with this specific model. I also have made a little decapitated cow off screen for Gus to be stepping on as he's roaring. And with everything fully painted and ready to go, meet Gus. Guys, thank you so much for watching. This was a labor of love, and it was such an awesome thing to work on. I hope you guys enjoyed it just as much as I did. I'll see you all in the next video. That's it for this one, and as always, take care.